Well, hey, everybody, as you are hopping in today, would love to hear where you are joining us from. I'm Holly Tate, CMO here at Leadr. I am in Houston, Texas. I live in Houston, Texas. I am here today in Houston. I traveled a little bit this week. I was in Orlando, Florida, but am back home as of last night and cannot wait to get to know you today. So today is new for us here at Leadr. We usually have two people on the webinar, but we decided for this one, I'm flying solo. You've got me. So I'm going to be looking to you to interact, drop in the chat and Q&A. So if you would do that in the chat right now, let me know where you're joining from. So again, I'm Holly. I'm in Houston. Now you might have to, on the chat, it usually defaults to host and panelists. So just click that drop down right there and click everyone. Here, I'll show us how. Houston, Texas. There we go. Awesome. All right. We've got Michigan, Ohio. Let's see, St. Louis, Boston. I love that. This is one of my favorite things about the world that we live in these days, how we're able to gather from all over the country and the world. Shout out to Elizabeth in Lubbock, Albany, New York. My goodness, I bet it's freezing up there. We've got lots of people from Houston. This is fun. Memphis, Tennessee. Joy, my parents grew up in Memphis. Dallas, Tampa, Florida, Frisco, South Bend, Indiana. Hey, Adam, good to see you. San Diego, one of my favorite places, Dawn. I love San Diego, especially La Jolla. That's awesome. Bowling Green, Kentucky. Well, welcome everybody. This webinar had the most signups that we've had in a really long time. So this is clearly a topic that is front of mind for many of us. It's one of the topics that I get asked about the most. And so today I'm looking forward to just sharing with you the learnings that I've had along the way as a leader and trying to facilitate growing healthy multi-generational teams. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Future-proofing our leadership. I'm going to share insights and learnings on managing a multi-generational team. What I would love to do is throughout our time together today, drop in the chat and or in the Q&A box. We're going to leave plenty of time at the end to dive into all of your questions. But feel free to, there's going to be several questions I'm going to ask throughout. So make sure you've got your keyboard ready to let me know your answers to those questions as we go. But a little bit about me. So this is me and my husband, Elliot. Again, live in Houston and joined the Leadr team about I guess it's been a little over 3 years, which is wild. I originally had my own consulting company. Leadr became a client of mine. And then I was so enthralled with our mission to develop 1 million leaders and the results that we were seeing through our platform that I jumped in full-time in March of 2021. And so it has just been such a joy to be a part of this team and the mission that we're on to develop 1 million leaders so that we can drive performance and really make sure that we are growing our companies, our organizations that we're a part of. I've spent about the last 14 years cultivating multi-generational leaders and teams. I started my career in sales and then quickly jumped over to executive search and staffing, where I was for about 9 years. And that was where I saw the pain of the multi-generational teams and millennials becoming such a big part of the workforce for the first time, which I am one. We'll talk about that in just a second. And the challenge that it is to bridge the generation gap across teams in a really healthy way. I'm also a member of the Forbes Communication Council, where I get to write about communication and leadership as well. So as I just mentioned, I spent about 9 years in executive search and staffing. And it was 2015, I had my 5-year anniversary at that company. It was a company called Vanderbloemen. And this was the time, I don't know if you remember, but 2015 was that time where it seemed like every Forbes magazine, every business article, it felt like the headlines were just throwing millennials under the bus. It was like, millennials are entitled. Millennials are job hoppers. Millennials are demanding. It was really negative. And I was looking around our team at Vanderbilt, we were a fast growing organization at the time. The majority of our team were millennials, and we had really high retention rates, and we were very high employee engagement. And I'm like, what is going on? I'm reading all these articles, and I've just been at this company now for 5 years. And I'm looking around. Oh, I guess it was 2017. Sorry, I got my year wrong. And I'm looking around, and a lot of my peers were also millennials who had been there for a long time. And so I decided to kind of reverse engineer and reflect on, why have I been in this role for 5 years? And what is it about our culture or my job or our leadership that has enabled me to feel engaged and empowered and really love my job for that long? And I ended up being there for a total of 8.5 years, almost 9 years. And so this article did really well. It was one of the most popular articles that we ever wrote on our blog. And then our CEO started writing about it on his Forbes article column. And so it was clearly a felt need of this generational gap and the clients that we were working with. So I started doing some teaching on this, doing workshops at different conferences around the country on this. So when I started my role at Leadr, fast forward, I guess, let's see, 18, 19, 20, about 3 years after I wrote this article, fast forward a few years. And so I come to the Leadr team, and I was a one-woman marketing team at the time, and felt very confident in my ability to lead the next generation because of all of this writing and speaking I was doing on leading millennials in my role at Vanderbilt. And so as a one-woman marketing team, and one of my colleagues came to me and said, hey, I have a friend, and her son is really interested in an internship program. And so I thought of you because I know that you've got a lot going on, and I thought he could be a help. And I was like, yes, I love that. I had built a lot of my team at Vanderbilt from interns. We would have interns, I would develop them, we'd hire them full time. It was a really great leadership pipeline for us there. So I interview him. It was a great interview. Could tell he was really sharp and motivated. So I bring him onto the team. And in our first one-on-one, we'll call him Frank, just for the sake of the story. And so we bring Frank on in our first one-on-one. I was so excited to have some help. I said, hey, Frank, we're going to do is, I've got this list of leadership quotes here, and then here's the login for Canva, a graphic design tool. If you could go in, and before our next one-on-one next week, if you could create some graphics that we can post on social media, that would be really helpful, because social media was just something that I really wanted to do better at, but it was always at the bottom of the priority list, given that I was a one-woman marketing team. So we go about our way. The week comes along, and in our next one-on-one, like, hey, Frank, haven't heard an update from you on that project. How's it going? How can I help? He goes, yeah, about that. It didn't really agree with that project or the direction. And so I just decided not to do it. And instead, I think we should do these things. And then he starts laying out a plan. I was taken aback. I thought, okay, this is very interesting. I've never gotten that sort of pushback, especially not from an intern before, about how he's just not going to do a project that I asked him to do. And so that was the first of several interactions that we had over our first month together, where I realized I am not the young one anymore. And I kind of felt like this. I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but having some experiences, especially with those that are younger on our team, kind of felt like this over that first month together. And so I started to do a deep dive into really understanding, looking in the mirror and going, I cannot assume that what it looks like to lead me as a millennial is going to work for Generation Z, much less going to work for Gen X or baby boomers, et cetera. And so what we're going to unpack together today from this experience that I had, and kind of this deep dive of really studying what it looks like to not only lead Generation Z, but build healthy multi-generational teams, is the following. So we're going to talk about why this is so important now. This is the first time in history where we've had 5 generations in the workforce. And so no wonder this is often a conflict that I talk to leaders about. We're also going to talk about the generational differences and how that has impacted not only culturally, but how it impacts us inside the workplace. And then we are going to dive deep into 5 practical steps. These are lessons that I've learned that no matter what generation that you are leading on your team, they're going to help you not only build trust with each person one-on-one, but also build unity as a team. And Debbie, just saw your question. And yes, we will share the presentation at the end as well. Okay, so the first thing I want us to do, so get ready, this is gonna be super interactive. I wanna learn from you. This is the most updated as of, I think, January of this year, where the generations fall. And so for Generation Z, those are folks that are about 12 to 27 years old. Millennials, 28 to 43, Gen X, 44 to 59, Boomers, 60 to 78, and Builders, 79 to 96. So take a second, and I would love for you to drop in the chat. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm not looking for, exact numbers, but where do the majority of your team fall? Okay, I'm seeing lots of millennials. I'm seeing lots of Generation X. That's great. We've got several Gen Zs here. Lots of Gen Zs on the team. Millennials, Gen X, yes, lots of millennials and Generation Z. I am not surprised. We're going to talk about that actually here in a second. We've got some Gen X and millennials. Debbie says our team is multi-generational. Jacob said it's split 50-50 between Gen X and millennials. Yeah, so I'm seeing lots of millennials, Generation X, and Generation Z. Oh, I like that. This is interesting. Somebody said Gen X, leadership boomers. Nice. Okay, thank you, everyone. This is so helpful. Okay, that Haley says boomers, millennials, and Gen Xers. Jennifer says boomers. I'm the only Gen X. We feel you, Jennifer. Hang in there. Oh my goodness, this is great. Okay, so Generation Z, Gen X, and millennials is what I'm seeing, and then a few boomers sprinkled throughout. Someone says we don't have any boomers at all and no builders. Awesome. Okay, thank you so much, guys. I love this. This is so, so helpful. So that's what I'm seeing across the board, which lines up with some data that I'm about to share with you. But first of all, I just want to let you know that you're not alone. So as I said, I get questions about multi-generational teams the most. And I think it's because, when we first started Leadr, goodness, 5 years ago now, we really went to work and we interviewed a ton of executive leaders on what were the 6 major problems that they faced in their organization that they felt was holding them back from leading their people well. And these were the 6 problems that surfaced. And so the second one was the generational gap. I think especially during COVID, this really reared its head because all communication structures changed. We were forced into remote working, which is number 4, which is like that disconnection of how do we really create a healthy culture and connection in a remote world. And that looks very different depending on what generation you're on. But the generation gap is one of the biggest problems that we see organizations face that holds them back, not only from developing their leaders, but ultimately performance. And so this data I found, this is as of December of last year of 2023, from CNBC based on a forecast report from Glassdoor. I thought this was really interesting. They're forecasting that beginning this year, Gen Z will make up a larger portion of the US workforce than baby boomers for the very first time. This is huge for a couple of reasons. And so I think if you look in the chat, what I'm seeing from you guys really mirrors this data that we might even already be there in a lot of our different industries or organizations. What's critical about this is, and it makes sense, I should have put a graph together, but if you'll kind of just follow my hands here, it kind of looks like an adoption curve. So there were tons of boomers that were born post-war. That's why they call them the baby boomers, because that population boomed after the war. Then there were less Gen Xers. Just by population, there's less Gen Xers. Then there were tons of millennials and the now Generation Z. And so that leaves a leadership gap by sheer population. It's not necessarily an incapability issue. It's not that boomers or millennials are any better than Gen X. It's just that there's fewer Gen Xers to fill those leadership spots. And so what we see because of that is a lot of boomers are sticking around a lot longer than they maybe intended to or wanted to, because they don't feel like they have those leaders that are ready to succeed them in leadership. And they've got to really raise up those millennials and then now Generation Z. And so that's why leading multi-generational teams is critical, because the generation gap is so big. And especially this year, I think a lot of boomers also held on through COVID and a little bit post-COVID, because it's been so rocky. We got out of COVID, and then the economy has been a really difficult season over the last 18 months or so. And so as we start to see the economy turn back around, I think a lot of boomers are going to be feeling more comfortable retiring, which again leaves Gen X to raise into those leadership spots, but there's going to be holes that millennials will need to fill, which then means Generation Z is going to need to step up into those roles that millennials have been in. And so this data to me was just really eye-opening to why this conversation is so important, and why you as executive teams really need to be looking in the mirror and going, what are we doing to not only build, a healthy culture overall, but specifically about this multi-generational issue that we have. And it's gotten a little bit better over the years. This stat, I believe, was from 2020, I want to say, that 80% of employees are not engaged. I do think it's raised a little bit, or it's gotten a little bit better. It's like 76 or 78% now, but I mean, it's nominal compared to that. So if we just kind of think from a picture perspective, think about your team right now, that 8 out of 10 of your team are disengaged in their work. And I think this is the critical thing that we have got to make sure that we're fixing when it comes to driving performance and making sure that we are building healthy teams. And so as I was thinking about my own experience with Frank, the intern, who was Generation Z, and looking across our own team at Leadr, and looking at this stat of, okay, if 8 out of 10 people are not engaged, why is that? Especially when it comes to the next generation. Why does it feel like they are asking for more autonomy in their role, or, that he felt permission to say, I'm not doing that project? And so the biggest factor that I found of disengagement is this data right here that Gallup goes on to say in the report, that more than any other factor, so compensation, benefits, let's, think about ping pong tables or fun, like whatever, even flexibility in the workplace, more than any other factor, it's managers that influence team engagement and performance. And so it talks about how the variance between team engagement, it's all goes back to the manager. 70% of why someone is disengaged in their role is the manager. So I've got a couple of questions in the chat. No, the stat is not exclusive to remote teams. It's for across the board in the workplace, is what that stat is. And then Ray, you're not alone. I get this question a lot. Please define engaged. And so engagement can be a hard thing to measure. We have inside of our platform, we define employee engagement as 3 things. So first is rapport, which is, do I trust my team and my leaders? The second one is maximization, which is, do I have the tools and resources that I need to win? And the other one is, do they have clarity? So it's clarity, maximization, and rapport. Clarity means, do I know what winning looks like in my role? And we found that when those 3 things are present, then that is an overall engaged person or team in their role. But data aside, we've all been that person or worked with that person that's disengaged. This is the disengaged person is the one that shows up, either to the minute or late to work, clocks out, same thing, early or to the minute. They're just doing the bare minimum to get by. They're not promoting the mission or purpose of the organization. It's just a job. And whereas the engaged team member is thinking about what's best for the organization as a whole, what can I do in my role today to propel us forward? They're excited and about coming to work each day. And so even though it might feel like a nebulous word, employee engagement, I think it's pretty clear when we think about those people we've worked with, or maybe that moment in our own time in our careers or in our jobs where we've felt disengaged. Okay, so as I was doing a deep dive of my own story and looking at all of this data, I really went to the source. And so I sent out a survey to our Generation Z team members on our team, and I asked a few questions. So I want to share with you what I learned, and then a light bulb moment that happened for me, and then we'll dive into our 5 practical steps. So I sent out a survey to Gen Z, and the first question that I asked was, describe your ideal manager. And so some things that I learned from them, here's some trends and answers that I heard were they're empowering. I want them to be relational, empathetic. That empathy word is a big one that I heard a lot. Direct, that was an interesting one. That they really are looking for clarity and directness. A trusting manager, a manager that is a developer, a manager that's intentional, compassionate, hardworking, and encouraging. So I'm like, okay, this is helpful, but I would also agree with all of these things. I would love to have all of these characteristics in my ideal manager. Okay, so this is good. This is helpful. But I went on to ask some more questions. The next thing I wanted to know was describe your ideal workplace. So I heard things like autonomy, relational, innovative, exciting, fun, intentional. You're going to hear these, some of these words show up over and over again. Creative, missional or purposeful, collaborative, and remote. That's that desire for some flexibility and autonomy. But again, I'm looking at these and I'm going, I want these things too. And I'm elder millennial. And I agree. I also want these things. So then I went on to ask, how do we retain you? What would keep you in a role for 3+ years? And this was really insightful. Again, some of these are patterns that we've already heard from an ideal manager and ideal workplace, but doing a role where I can operate in a space that I'm gifted in, doing something that makes me excited to show up, handing off of responsibility to me because it shows that I'm trusted, being a part of a mission-driven mindset, being pushed and grown in excellence and ability, and being a part of an innovative and creative culture. So the things that I'm hearing from them in an ideal manager are the same that I'm hearing in an ideal workplace, which is also what will keep them around for 3+ years. And that's what I think is key here about when we think about employee engagement and when we think about the role of the manager, that's the most critical part in retention. All of these work together to drive engagement and retention of our team. But I also wanted to take this a step further, not just what would keep you in your role for 3+ years, but what do you value most overall when you're planning for your career? So not necessarily just here at our team at Leadr and being in your current job, but what do you value most? So I heard development and growth, freedom and flexibility. And then the bottom 2 really align with that freedom and flexibility. They're asking questions like, what will life look for me inside and outside of work? Balance is huge for Generation Z. They want to put their family first while also focusing on their career. This is a bit different from, Gen X and boomers. And we're going to talk about why that is in a moment. But the balance between work and life is really, really, really critical for this generation. And then a few other insightful things that I heard when I asked about what else that they wanted to share when it comes to leading Generation Z was people over progress. I think that the Generation Z has seen their parents, Gen X or younger boomers, really value progress or career over people. And so that is something that I've heard over and over again that's really important to them. And then depth over width. And this was very insightful. This person on our team, I think was 21 or 22. And he said, we are the most connected generation than ever, but we're also the loneliest generation than ever. And so go deep with us. We're really looking for guides and mentors, not just a boss. And that was a really interesting takeaway for me, where they're looking for deep relationships with their boss or their coworkers. All right. So as I was, again, reflecting on this, and I'm going, I want this too. Are all of these learnings only applicable to Generation Z, or is there something here that we can learn when it comes to leading multi-generational teams? And so I started to think about my own team. And so these are three of my team members here at Leadr, and I picked one from one that's in their 20s, one that's in their 30s, and one that's in their 40s. So we've got a Gen Zer here in Amy, we've got a Millennial here in Carissa, and we've got a Gen Xer here in CJ. And I realized that all of those characteristics that I heard from Generation Z also applies to millennials and Gen X. We don't have any boomers on our team, but I would imagine, I think about, my parents who are boomers, and they would agree with those things too. So I wondered, what is the difference then? Where does this tension come from? Me as leading Generation Z and having some of this frustration, as I shared that I had with Frank, and he was only about 11 years younger than me at the time, which you would think we would think very similarly. But why is that? Why am I having some tension with folks that are closest to me in age than my fellow millennials or Gen Xers that are on our team? And so I found this incredible graph from a company called McCrindle. And it's a couple years outdated at this point, but I wanted to share it with you because this was the light bulb moment for me. But they've got a ton of amazing resources on their team. They do a lot of generational studies. And so I wanted to share this with you, and we're going to unpack it together. So when I found this graph about the different generations, I had some key light bulb moments. So across the top, we've got our different generations. There's 6 represented here because they even include Gen Alpha, which I think is really smart because, as we mentioned, Gen Zers are likely, they're going to be our interns if they're not already. Gen Alpha is, they're going to be our interns coming up soon. And so as Generation Z, the youngest Generation Zs graduate from high school and college and enter the workforce very, very quickly, as that stat said. We also need to be thinking about Gen Alpha. I think a lot of us figured out millennials, which is this Generation Y here. That's just another name for millennials. We figured that out too late. Millennials are in their early 40s. The oldest millennials are in their early 40s now. So if we're just now getting comfortable working with millennials, we are far too late thinking about Generation Z and Gen Alpha, which is why building multi-generational teams is so critical. But here's what I want you to look at here. Look at the rate of change that has happened from millennial or even from Gen X to Generation Z and then to Gen Alpha. So one of the things that I think is so present about this is the musical devices. So builders, they had the record player. That was a revolutionary technology at the time, to be able to have a record player and listen to music that way. Then the audio cassette came along with boomers. And so we still have, again, this is the first time in history where we have 5 generations represented in the workforce. And so when we have someone who is, grew up on audio cassettes all the way to Gen Z, who has grown up having all music on demand for free on their phone at any time, why would we expect their perspective for leadership and the workplace to be the same? And that's true for so many things. Generation Z can literally start a business on Instagram, on their iPhone. They are not coming to work necessarily for just the skills. They can go to YouTube and Google how to do just about anything that they want to. And so why would we expect their expectations of the workplace to be the same as even my generation, millennials, who the iPod was innovative. I remember the iPod came out, I think, when I was in late high school, just crazy. And then also think about how, Generation Z, they can order something and get delivered on their doorstep within 2 hours. That's what they've grown up with, that expectation to post a photo on social media and get instant feedback. So why would they not expect instant feedback from their managers? Whereas our older generations, we didn't grow up with that instantaneous feedback or on-demand entertainment. And so I think the rate of change in technology and access to information has really informed this next layer, which is how we view leadership. So my next slide zooms in on this part because this was the light bulb moment for me. Look at when I do studies a lot of times on generations, I notice that they lump in millennials and Gen Z. It's like, oh, they're all the same because they're the quote unquote young people. It's like, okay, cool. So we've got quote unquote the old people and the young people. But here's what's so interesting to me. So look at how builders and boomers had a very similar perspective on leadership styles. It changes a little bit. Like the thing that's different here is the arrows. And I thought about it. I'm like, okay, why is that? Well, let's think about what happened in culturally that they either experienced in their generation or were influenced by. And that was World War I and World War II. And so it makes sense that I think about the business leaders at the time. It were, people like Henry Ford and Jack Welch, where it was very like Jack Welch's whole thing was you fire the bottom 10%. It was very top down hierarchical leadership styles. And so it was a little bit of a shift between builders and boomers, but the first big shift comes with Gen X. So I think about thought leaders for this generation, which are like Brene Brown and Simon Sinek, where it wasn't so autocratic and hierarchical, but it was more, how do we build a team with the leader in the middle of the team? And then the subtle difference to millennials is that it's the leader pushing more autonomy out to the team. And so what's so fascinating here is that millennials and Gen X are actually wired pretty similarly in how we view authority and leadership. It's the shift from millennials to Generation Z where everything drastically changes. Our org chart expectation looks very, very different. We go from top down over here. We go to pretty flat leadership structure with Generation X and millennials. And then we go to this triangle with Generation Z. But when I saw this, it really lined up with my experience that their expectation is that they are the team, as that they see themselves as leaders, as having a voice, and that the leader is influencing from the outside, more of a coach, more of a guide, empowering the team to make decisions themselves. This is a very big difference in how and their expectations of their manager and how they want to be led. And I think we saw a lot of that in the feedback that I received. But the difference is that, even millennials upward in generations, we didn't have as many opportunities as Generation Z does. They have more job opportunities than ever before. There are, when we look back at boomers or builders, there was a small handful of careers or job paths that you could go on. And then a lot of that opened with millennials as technology progressed. And now when you can literally start a business on your iPhone, Generation Z has so many opportunities, especially with the gig economy. When they are coming to work a full-time job, they expect to be developed, empowered, and to find something in their job and from their manager that they can't just find online. And so that was eye-opening for me, and realized that I needed to change a lot of my leadership style in order to adapt to the next generation. And what I realized was it's a huge shift from management to coaching, from controlling and directing to empowering and inspiring for the next generation. It'll be really interesting too to see how this shapes out with Gen Alpha as we go. So what does this practically mean as we shift from management to coaching? Here's a few ways that I've seen this play out. In the old world of top-down hierarchical leadership structure, the new expectation is bottoms up. So things like one-on-ones, rather than task management and only talking about performance, the expectation is, how am I being developed? How am I being invested in as an employee? It's a very different mindset when it comes to being developed and having a relationship with our manager. I was just at a conference this week with executive leaders, and one of the things that I heard was, with my boomers on my team, it's very short one-on-ones. They come with their list. It's, here's the things I want to knock out. They don't desire as much to get into the weeds of how they're doing or how they're feeling. Whereas with Generation Z, those one-on-ones are an hour, sometimes an hour and a half. And that's not always possible in our organizations. but the expectation is, I really want to be developed and led and not just be given a task list to do. Think about feedback. Kind of talked about Jack Welch and some of those leadership styles that are more of that hierarchical mindset, where feedback is, here's how you failed, or we're going to fire the bottom 10%. Maybe you hear about it, from a reviews perspective, you hear about it on an annual basis in a performance review. Whereas the new world of coaching is bottoms up. It's, let's talk about growth opportunities. I don't want to, I want to hear more about where I'm going and how I can get better to progress. And reviews, why do I need to wait for an annual review to get feedback from my manager when my expectation is I get feedback instantaneously in every other interaction I have in my experience outside of work? And so my question to you, so I know this was a lot, and hopefully you're processing right now. This might be challenging a lot of us and really causing us to look in the mirror and go, oh my goodness, my management style or my leadership style really needs to adapt. And so my question is, what is the biggest challenge that you're facing with this shift from management to coaching? So would love to see in the chat, you could drop there. When you hear about this, what is the biggest challenge you're facing and making this shift as either your own self as a leader or your organization from management to coaching? So Amanda, thank you so much for your vulnerability there. She says, it's a lot to wrap my head around, especially since I was managed by boomers and builders. And that's a great point. A lot of us, we mirror what has been modeled for us. We mirror what has been modeled for us. And so if we've been modeled the more hierarchical top-down leadership style, then that's what we're going to mirror, unless we're intentional about adapting and changing that. Michael says, I'm learning that, or the biggest challenge is being more patient and learning to ask good questions. That is such a good takeaway. Absolutely. Slowing down enough to ask those good questions. I've had to learn that as well, for sure. Oh, Jenny, I feel you. Jenny says she sent this to a host and panelists, others on management team not believing things need to shift. And that's why hopefully, if this is helpful too, to bring these resources back to your executive team, that the data takes care of itself. I gave a talk similar to this at a conference about a year ago. And one of the leaders came up to me afterwards and he goes, I hear you. I've experienced everything. He was a boomer. He's like, I've experienced everything that you're saying. It's so frustrating. Like, what's the alternative? Like, I don't really want to lead this way. And I said, the alternative is they're going to leave your team and you're going to lose momentum. You're going to have to backfill those roles. You're going to have a really hard time hiring, much less retaining your team. Our people are the foundation of the goods and services that we provide. And so we don't really have another option but to adapt our leadership style if we want our organization to grow into the future. Someone else says, I find myself not having the time to spend with team members like I wish I had. That's really good, Patty. Thank you for your vulnerability there. Absolutely. It definitely takes intentionality and prioritizing, which we'll talk about in a second. The triangle of team struggles to function as individuals. Once a team, always a team. Staff culture, leadership buy-in. This is really good, guys. Shutting up and listening. I feel you, Paul. Letting them do the talking, coaching using good questions. Absolutely. Being middle management in an org between people wanting management versus coaching. Yeah, Joshua, that can be a tough spot where you're the middle level manager, I believe, is the hero of organizations. You're in that player coach spot. That's actually our logo here at Leadr, right here on the screen, the bottom right. That's why it's a chevron, because it models the or mirrors the corporal in the army, which is that player coach. They're on the front lines with their team, but they're also leading up to the executives from a strategic perspective. It's a difficult, but such an important part of the organization to be in. Someone else says communication with clarity and extending trust. Trust without clarity equals work without direction. Clarity without trust, fear, and inaction. Ooh, really good, Lisa. That is awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for your vulnerability and sharing this. Oh, this is good. Someone else says, I am a boomer and have really enjoyed learning about these styles, trying to adapt by asking questions, understanding where my Gen Zers are coming from, creating a culture they can lead moving forward, while the few boomers can speak into what might be helpful. Really, really good. And I think that's the key. It's us being willing to adapt and change. That's the hardest part as humans. It's difficult to change. Okay, so let's migrate into my 5 practical steps, and then we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A. Please feel free to go ahead and drop the questions in the chat. That'll also help me know how much time to leave for everything or for all the questions at the end. Okay, so I don't know about you guys, but this is what my calendar often looks like. I'm like, want to take a nap just looking at it. But it's true. I travel a lot, do a lot of speaking, have a lot of meetings. And so what is tempting for me is on a week like this to go, oh, you know what? I just talked to Carissa yesterday, like she's good. Or Kristen and I, we just caught up. So no worries on that. I'll just catch up with her next week. And I'll cancel my one-on-ones because I feel relationally connected or like I've already caught up with that person. But what happens is if I do this week after week or a couple weeks in a row, the subliminal message that I'm sending to my team that I don't mean to is that my projects are more important than you as a person. And that has been, I've done that before. And the number one way to lose trust is to cancel those one-on-ones and accidentally send that message to our team that whatever we're working on that day is more important than them as a person or us developing them. And this is the tension as a leader, getting the job done. And Patty, you said this so wonderfully in the chat. That's the tension, is we've got a lot to do. We've got a lot on our plate, but we also have to remember that our number one responsibility is the care and development of our people. And often when we invest more time in the care and development of our people, then the job actually gets done faster, and like more efficiently and more effectively. But it's often really difficult. It's counterintuitive to make that switch. It's like, but I've got this to-do list of 10 things. Let me cancel my one-on-ones. But maybe in those one-on-ones, we could have empowered somebody else on our team to take 3 things off that list for us. And so this is the tension as leaders. I know I feel this every single day. And so I wanted to give 5 practical action steps that I've learned along the way that hopefully help you navigate this tension in your own leadership and as you're building your multi-generational team. So the first one is really encourage you to take this back to your leadership team and do a generational assessment of your team. Actually usually when I share this information for the first time, it's the very first time that a leadership team has ever really realized the breakdown of the generations represented. And you might find that you lean very young and you need to go hire some folks that have more experience, that are maybe boomers or Gen Xers, that can bring a different perspective and different experience to balance out the team. And then vice versa, maybe you are like, oh my goodness, we don't have any Gen Zers on our team. And we're missing that younger perspective that is so needed right now as the world is changing so much. So that's the first step. Highly encourage you to take this information and do a generational assessment of your team. All right. The second one is, we kind of just talked about this, but be a coach, not a manager. So many of you in the chat talked about how the biggest challenge for you is to slow down enough to ask really good questions. And that is so good that you're acknowledging that, because that's what coaching is. When I think about coaching versus management, I often think about the carrot versus the stick, right? And so there's kind of like, if we think about like a what is a level, a teeter-totter? You've got micromanagers on one side and macro managers on the other side. And so I know for myself, I've both been both of these. I've also been led by both of these. And on the opposite ends of these spectrums is where both you as a leader and your individual contributors are going to be frustrated. Because on the micromanager side, they want to know everything. I had a manager one time who wanted me to send an update by 2 p.m. every single Wednesday of all of the things I had done that week. And I'm sitting there like, are you serious? Like, I'm going to have to take all of the things I've done that week, which is a lot. It's going to take me a couple hours to really send a recap. Yeah, Paul Seesaw, that's good. Thank you. To write that out and send you everything I've done that week. It felt very micromanaging. Whereas on the other hand, with a macro manager, which I've also worked for, where I would show up in his office at 10 a.m. I still remember, 10 a.m. every Tuesday, I would sit there for 10 minutes and then his assistant would come in and say, oh, he's going to cancel it. He's not going to be able to make it today. And that's not helpful either, because I had a list of things I needed to talk to him about. And so, I think about like the micromanager is more on the stick side of leadership. It's more punitive, or it feels like we're being penalized. Whereas macro managers tend to lead by rewards, which it's not a bad thing, but when you're only leading by carrots or rewards and not being a consistent coach, that is not developing your team. I call it swoop and pooping managers with the carrot, where it's like you never hear from them, and then all of a sudden they swoop in, poop on your desk, mess up all your priorities, and then they swoop away again. And so what we want to do as much as possible is be right in the middle of this. And that's what coaching is. I really love, and Adam, you beat me to it. Did you know this is going to be on my next slide? That's awesome. Our co-founders wrote a book called Management is Dead, which talks about these principles and gives you five keys to unlocking what it looks like to truly be a coach and less of a manager. So there's a QR code. It'll take you to Amazon. You can find it on Amazon, really anywhere where they sell books. It is a great read. It came out last year. And thank you, Adam, for suggesting that. I'm so glad it's been helpful to you. And then on the left side here, this is how I often describe how it feels, the differences between management and coaching. So management is us pointing at each other and going, you versus me, with the problem or the goal in between us. Whereas coaching is locking arm by arm, and it's you and me versus the conflict or versus the goal that we're working on. Management, at the top is going, why haven't you hit your goal yet? Or why is this not done? Or it's criticism. Whereas coaching is constructive feedback based on the end outcome in mind. Locking arm in arm, saying, how can I help you? What obstacles are you running into? How are you thinking about this? And how can I help? And that's the difference between management and coaching. So that's number 2, be a coach, not a manager. All right, number 3, have consistent one-on-ones with every direct report. And if you feel overwhelmed by that, it probably means that you have too many direct reports. That is one of my soapboxes, is making sure that you do not have too many one-on-one or too many direct reports, because that's when one-on-ones get really difficult. So I want to kind of walk you through a little bit of what this looks like for me and my team, and how one-on-ones have been a critical part of my leadership. So first of all, if you're a data person, the data tells us, especially the younger generation, they want weekly, if not daily, check-ins from their manager. And a lot of times I hear eyes rolling, or, you want to take a nap looking at this. It doesn't mean that you need to have daily one-on-ones, but daily checking in. So my manager, our CEO, Matt, is great at this. For me, it doesn't, we have a weekly one-on-one. And then if we haven't talked that day, he'll call me on his way home from work, or he'll send me a Slack and say, hey, we haven't talked all day. Anything I can do to help you? Right? Just those daily little check-ins are super helpful, because again, we have to remember that the younger generation, their world moves at the speed of light. And so they want to be connected with you on a more regular basis. So it's it's that important. It's not just me saying you should have, regular one-on-ones. It's the data tells us that their desire is to have regular check-ins with you. And so as if you're a customer on our webinar today, or you've heard about Leadr, you know that one-on-ones are a big part of what we believe drives performance in organizations, because when we're having consistent one-on-ones, we're developing our people, performance will be a lagging indicator of that. And so this is what my one-on-one with Anna on my team, this is a real screenshot of ours from February 6th of what that looks like. And so we're going to talk about this actually in a moment, but we've got her goals front and center. And then I try to focus on, it's not a perfect formula, but we have anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour every week. And I try to focus on 3 things. So care. So you're going to see, first of all, and it's a recurring agenda item. I'm a Enneagram 8. I'm an ENTJ. I'm a DG with Working Genius, if you're a fan of that. So I'm a very more aggressive personality, if you can't tell already, 50 minutes into our webinar. And so I need the reminder and the accountability to slow down and ask Anna how she's really doing. So we start with a care question. Sometimes it's 5 minutes and sometimes it's 15 minutes. Just kind of depends on what Anna needs that day. Then we go into performance, and that's where I'm approving things. That's where she's asking, what do we need to add to your calendar? We get into customer and product marketing, but really starting with that care and development piece is critical, not only for us to build trust with each other and make sure we have a really good relationship, but then making sure that I'm slowing down enough to not treat her like a project, but really make sure that I'm leading her as a person and coaching and guiding her. And then what I found is she comes to these one-on-ones, she's leading them. She's adding things to the agenda. She is asking me, hey, Holly, I need your approval on this. I need your feedback on this. Jenny just asked, do you do your one-on-ones online or on the phone or in person? So we're a remote team. So we do ours on Zoom. I think video is critical. I mean, sometimes we've been working together for a long time, so we'll do phone every once in a while, and it's not a big deal because we know each other really well. But I would default to video every single time because that body language is so important in building trust. So I would definitely recommend that. And then if you're in person, obviously it's great to do it in person if you can. So get those one-on-ones on the calendar, be consistent about them. They are the most important meetings that you have. And I know, trust me, I know it's counterintuitive and it's scary, but when you have consistent one-on-ones that are effective, you will see other meetings drop off your calendar because your team is going to start stepping up and taking responsibility because you have empowered them in those one-on-ones and you don't have to be in as many meetings. So that's my hot take on one-on-ones. All right, number 4, set clear goals and give regular feedback. Just talked about this. When you give feedback, it's not you versus me. It's locking arm in arm with your team member and providing coaching towards the goal. Only 26% of employees strongly agree that the feedback they receive helps them do better work. That's so sad that only 1 in 4 employees agree with that. It's our job to give feedback that helps them do better work. And so in your one-on-one, this is a place where you can making sure that you have the goals front and center and asking questions like, hey, I see that it's off track. That's at risk. How can I help? Can I share some feedback with you? Really creating a safe place where you're bringing it up on a regular basis. I think too often we withhold feedback, we bring it up too late, and that's when it gets weird. So giving feedback on goals and one-on-ones every single week on goals and feedback in our one-on-ones. And then provide flexibility and autonomy. And so there's no right or wrong here. I'm a huge advocate of hybrid and remote teams. I think in person is wonderful, but not everybody can do that. But this is a critical, this really opened my eyes from Harvard Business Review says that when we give mandates, like you say, you have to be in the office Monday through Friday, or you have to be, in your chair during these hours, it feels like a violation of autonomy, which is one of the most important intrinsic drivers of threat and reward in the brain. So when we feel as humans that something is being forced upon us, that sends signals to our brain of that fight or flight mode. And so what does it look like to give a sandbox of flexibility that works for your organization where people feel like they have more of a choice? That is a really, really important part there. All right, well, let's transition to Q&A. A question that I want to leave you with is, what is your biggest takeaway or area of focus to better bridge the generation gap on your team? A lot of you already shared that with your challenge, the biggest challenge you were facing. So that's the reflection question that I want to leave you with before we get into some questions. I'm already seeing some awesome ones in the chat. And then I wanted to let you know, we have recently released a couple months ago, we are in partnership with Patrick Lencioni and the Table Group, and have created the Leader Advantage, which helps you align your goals and cascade clarity across your org chart. Which is often one of the biggest challenges of leading a multi-generational team, is making sure that everyone has the clarity that you need. So feel free to scan that QR code or go to our website and click on Leader and Lencioni there at the very top, book a demo, and we'll be glad to show you that. All right, let's dive into some Q&A in our last couple minutes together. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so that you guys can see my face a bit better. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to take a look here at the questions. Okay, do you recommend 2 supervisors meeting with the employee if one supervisor is in training? I think it depends. I wouldn't say every single week. Well, okay, let me rephrase that. If the supervisor is going to eventually be this person's supervisor, that might be helpful to help build trust, but I would do it for a limited amount of time. It's just really difficult for that employee to really build that one-on-one trust with their manager if there's a third party in the room. So I think it kind of depends, Patty, on what the end goal there is. But I think the best way that you can train is by modeling the behavior that you want mirrored, and having your supervisor see that. Okay, Adam says, what's the most effective number of direct reports to have? Adam, I wish it was black and white, but it's not. Every leader has a different span of care. So for me, more than 4 direct reports, like when I hit 5, I start to feel like I'm not being my best for my team when I have 5 direct reports. Any more than 5 for me personally is just beyond my span of care, because I'm a pretty all-in person. I really like, I feel like 3 is like my sweet spot. 4, I'm like starting to feel a little bit. 5 is where I'm like, okay, I can do this, but I feel like I'm gonna have to drop some other things off my plate in order to really invest in these 5. But like our CEO has had up to 10 direct reports at one time. He has a larger span of care. So not a black and white answer. I think it really depends on you. It depends on the type of team you're leading, the scope of responsibility, and the different roles that there are. But I would ask yourself the question, am I able to show up as my best self as a leader, investing in my my direct reports or not? And that's a good reflection question to kind of figure out if you have too many or not. All right, let's see. Thank you, Ateret. She says, when you have, or she or he, I'm so sorry, I'm not sure, but when you have consistent one-on-ones that are effective, you will see other meetings drop off your calendar. Yes, yes, yes. I love it. Thank you for taking that away as well. Okay, let me check the Q&A box here. Okay, great. Awesome. Somebody said, oh yeah, Jenny already answered that one. One-on-ones online or on the phone or in person. Debbie says, you gave me a fresh perspective. I look forward to your presentation. Will be emailed. Yes, we're going to send a replay link out to everybody. Steve says, how to develop those who are a little resistant to goal setting. Great question, Steve. So there's a really, first of all, I would try to dig in with that person on what that fear is. Try to have several weeks of open conversation around, why are they resistant to goals? You might find that they've had a really negative experience previously with a manager where they felt like they were penalized when they didn't hit a goal. So that would be my first step, is to try to open a safe place where you can have that conversation of understanding why. And then I would start with a really simple goal, something like, read a book a month, or a goal that that they can achieve to help them feel like they've got a win. And then it's going to snowball and make setting goals that much easier. But a lot of people who are resistant to goals, I've found that they've had a really negative, almost traumatic experience with goal setting previously. And so I would encourage you to get to the root of that. Okay, someone else says, I am Gen Z. How do I feel less different than my boomer and X-dominated teams? I'm not sure I fully understand the question there. How do I feel less different than, yeah, not sure, but feel free to email me and I'm happy to help even more. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much. Oh, Shannon just asked, how can we add this training to Leadr to assign to our managers? Great question, Shannon. We will add this to the curated by Leadr library. There is a drop down there that says Leadr resources. So we'll add that there in the next, we'll see, maybe the next couple weeks or so, but our team will do that and make sure that you can share it to everybody. Well, thanks so much for joining me. I know there's a lot of things you could have done on your Thursday. So glad you're with us. Feel free to email me with any questions. Our team's there to help support you in your own leadership and with your team. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thanks so much.